Welcome back to Viewpoint, where we now turn to the announced closure of the Instituto Cervantes. How has the news been received by the former Chief Minister who brokered the Córdoba Agreement, of which the Cervantes was a part? And how has it been received by the Institute's director?
Hombre, lógicamente estamos todos muy apenados, ¿no? No te puedo decir que el anuncio del cierre nos haya alegrado. Lógicamente hemos dedicado muchísimas horas de trabajo a la comunidad. Creo que hemos dado un servicio al menos digno a la comunidad de Gibraltar, la que merece, ¿no? Y desde luego siempre hemos intentado mejorar nuestro trabajo, ya sea desde el punto académico o desde el punto de vista cultural. Hemos organizado más de 200 actividades culturales y lógicamente todo el equipo ha estado trabajando de la mano, como una piña, tanto los profesores como el personal de staff que tenemos aquí, ¿no? Por tanto, lógicamente estamos apenados y creo que podríamos haber hecho muchísimo más trabajo.
Well, the Instituto is only tangentially part of the Córdoba Agreement, in the sense that it was something that the Spaniards wanted to do at the time that we were doing the Córdoba Agreements. It wasn't something that was negotiated about in a trilateral sense. The reality of it is that it was completely safe for Gibraltar. The Instituto Cervantes is not established on Spanish soil. It is established only on territory that is not Spanish. That is not to say that that is the reason why I did it. That is the reason why it was safe to do it. There is, from Señor Margallo's point of view, a presumably unintended but nevertheless real adverse consequence for the Spanish position. And that is that Señor Margallo has said that one of the reasons why he wants to close the Instituto is that the Instituto Cervantes do not operate on Spanish territory. Well, that is a renunciation of the Treaty of Utrecht. In the Treaty of Utrecht, Spain concedes, as a matter of treaty, that Gibraltar is British, not Spanish. Any policy that Spain now adopts, and anything that Spain now does, on the basis of its assertion that Gibraltar is not British territory and therefore eligible to host an Instituto Cervantes as foreign territory, but rather Spanish and therefore ineligible to host an Instituto Cervantes, is a straightforward renunciation by Spain of the Treaty of Utrecht, of which Britain should take note and do likewise, which would tick one of Gibraltar's much hankered after boxes.
Well, look, Gibraltar is a community that is very, very special. And so when somebody comes into our community, even though we might initially be suspect about what their objectives are as an organization or as an institution, Gibraltar tends to quickly, and Gibraltarians, of course, who make up Gibraltar, tend to quickly build relationships, tend to quickly build trust. I mean, people know there have been representatives of the Spanish Foreign Minister of the Spanish Foreign Ministry historically living amongst us, who have arrived as foreigners and quickly become integrated into the community. The Instituto arrived. It is not just a brass plate. There are people behind it, good people like Francisco Oda, who have given a lot of time to the community. Whether you agree with what some might perceive as the ultimate objective or not, and whether some people might see it as the thin end of the wedge of cultural osmosis, or others might see it as a very positive attempt to allow us to continue with our bilingualism. I think bilingualism is important to Gibraltarians. It gives us advantages. We don't want to lose bilingualism. Whatever attitude you take to the Instituto Cervantes as an organization, then the people who have made it up have been made very welcome in Gibraltar. They have integrated themselves to a very great extent, and we will be very sorry to see them go. Now, given the attitude that Mr. Margallo has taken, where he hasn't just abrogated in what he said at the Córdoba Accord, he's actually tried to abrogate the Treaty of Utrecht, which he sometimes says he has to respect even though he doesn't like it. But in relation to the Instituto, he has said Gibraltar is Spanish territory, present tense. Well, look, as he himself has said before, he might like Gibraltar to be Spanish territory in the future, but at the moment, under the Treaty of Utrecht, Gibraltar is British territory. Well, in that instance, to have the Instituto Cervantes in Gibraltar as an offshoot, as a tributary of the Instituto Cervantes in the UK, because this Instituto was a branch, I think, of the Manchester Instituto Cervantes, was not, as he said, in some way to recognize that Gibraltar was British. The logic is completely and utterly broken. I just think that what was being done at a human level, forget the institutional level, forget the whether this is attempted osmosis at a cultural or other level, at a human level, was very positively received by some people and was being delivered with great sensitivity and great care by people who came here and established themselves to do good, honest, hard day's work in good faith, and they will be missed.
La verdad es que ha sido todo un éxito gracias al apoyo que hemos tenido desde el principio por parte de la sociedad gibraltareña. Tanto es así que no esperamos que tantos alumnos pudieran visitar nuestras aulas, ¿no? Tuvimos que hacer un aulario nuevo incluso porque iban increciendo el número de matrículas, que ha alcanzado el número de 4.000 en los casi 4 años. Ya ves el cartel que estamos celebrando el 4º aniversario, que lo cumplimos el 4 de abril. Y son 4.000 alumnos, 4.000 matriculados, y de esos 4.000 el 65% aproximadamente han sido niños y adolescentes gibraltareños, ¿no? Y luego, a partir de ahí, son los gibraltareños ya adultos que sobre todo vienen para los cursos de español específico, ¿no? Español jurídico, español para los negocios, y este es nuestro perfil. Y a partir de ahí, el resto de los adultos pues son muchos ciudadanos que están residiendo aquí en Gibraltar o en España y que están trabajando aquí en distintos trabajos, ¿no? Y que son procedentes de otros países como de Polonia, Bulgaria, Rumanía, etcétera, ¿no?
Well, it's the end of a process for Margallo where he, during the last 4 years, has attempted to undo everything that his predecessor, Moratinos, did in relation to the Córdoba agreements. So that has to be seen in that context. I think that Mr. Margallo probably sees the end of his political career. There is a chance that Pepe may not be returned into government next time round. And what he's effectively doing is he is undoing everything and attempting this one last thing that he's attempting to undo, which is the Instituto Cervantes. I have to say with the Instituto Cervantes that the decision is not final because, of course, it's not Margallo's decision. My understanding of how you set up and you undo an Instituto Cervantes is that it's got to be done by a council of ministers. So the council of ministers, the government, the Spanish government, will effectively vote on the establishment of an instituto and also vote for the dissolution. So there still has to be that. Obviously, Mr. Margallo himself wants it to be undone. We will see. I think it's a very, very sad day. It's a very sad day for Gibraltar-Spanish relations. The Instituto Cervantes was never a threat to Gibraltar, as the GSD said on many, many occasions. Indeed, we justified it on the basis that the Instituto Cervantes are only created in foreign territory, which ironically is the very reason why Mr. Margallo wants to do away with it here in Gibraltar. It also serves a very useful purpose because in my discussions with Francisco Oda, he has told me, I have no reason to doubt this, that in fact over 60% of all those that go to the Institute to learn Spanish are actually Gibraltarian students studying for their GCSE and also for their A-levels. So it's really sad for Gibraltar. I think it's even sadder for Spain that you have this individual, Mr. Margallo, that is prepared to really sacrifice cultural institutes and institutes that are there in order to further the Spanish language, sacrifice it at the high altar of really his own distorted political principles.
Fred, thank you for giving us of your time. Can I start off by asking you about your involvement in the Instituto since it was originally set up in Gibraltar?
Well, I was approached by them to see if I would like to introduce the films they show at the Instituto, and I agreed, and I worked with them for a number of years. My role was really to introduce the films on the Monday evenings, and it's a role that I welcome because it gave me an opportunity to indulge in something that I enjoy and like a lot, which is the cinema, and not just the mainstream commercial Hollywood cinema, but world cinema and independent cinema. So I welcome the opportunity.
What can you tell us, having been involved in this way in the Instituto's cultural program? What can you tell us about the role that you think the Instituto has played in Gibraltar in recent years?
I think it's been a very important role. It has provided a more diverse range of cultural activities. It has showed us that there is more to Spain than just tapas and wine, that there is a depth of culture in all spheres. I believe they have zarzuela clubs, literature clubs, in the film club, and they've had book presentations, wine tasting, a whole range of activities which has enhanced the quality of life locally, and I think they've served a very important purpose culturally.
Let me ask you about politics. Do you think that there has been any politics done by the Instituto Cervantes? Some people refer to it as a Trojan horse. You have been working voluntarily for them. Have you experienced any such politics?
No, not at all. I think the whole idea, the whole claim that it's a Trojan horse is ridiculous. It's absurd. These people are promoting Spanish culture. They have every right, as if we had a French institute or an Italian institute, to provide this diversity that we lack so much here, because we are a very close community. So to say it's a Trojan horse is ridiculous. And in my time there, I have never ever experienced any political element creeping into the activities at all.
Jonathan, I don't know what the opponents of the Instituto Cervantes in Gibraltar ever thought or feared that it might be. It's not capable of being a Trojan horse. It's not a Trojan horse. It's not built of Trojan horse material. You know, this is a cultural, linguistic organization which serves cultural and linguistic purpose, a language that we share with Spain, and culture that we consume almost every day on Spanish television when we visit Spain. You know, we Gibraltarians have never been anti-Spanish in a cultural sense. This idea that we have to reject Spanish culture and our interest in Spanish culture and our desire to consume Spanish culture in Gibraltar simply because we reject the Spanish political aspiration to take over our sovereignty is as bad as something that we complain that Spain does, and that is that she mixes sports with politics and seeks Gibraltar's exclusion. We mustn't fall into the trap of doing in another area of life the very things that we criticize Spain for doing. I don't know. As far as I'm concerned, the Instituto Cervantes has never been and has never been capable of being a threat to Gibraltar politically. Had I thought otherwise, of course, I would never have allowed the Instituto Cervantes to come into Gibraltar. I think the Instituto Cervantes' presence in Gibraltar is good and positive, and it is good and positive for Gibraltar, and it is good and positive for Spain, and I deeply regret, on both sides, Spain and Gibraltar, the view of anybody that thinks that we are all best off without it.
Y por tanto estos días han sido pues un poco tristes porque la gente me veía por la calle, nos daba casi el pésame, ¿no? Y esto siempre es de agradecer. Ha sido magnífico ver la reacción de la gente y desde aquí no encuentro palabras de agradecimiento, ¿no? A tantos gibraltareños que nos han dado su apoyo y que han apostado porque nosotros sigamos y que han valorado muy positivamente nuestro trabajo, y esto siempre es de muy agradecer, ¿no? Y por tanto yo quiero aprovechar esta oportunidad que tú me das para agradecer uno a uno, darle las gracias a todas las personas que nos están apoyando y que han mandado cartas, que nos han mandado bombones, que nos han dado, bueno, todo tipo de apoyo, ¿no? Muchas gracias a todos.
Well, first of all, it is not an office of the Spanish Foreign Ministry. It is an independent organization that is politically accountable and is funded through the Spanish Foreign Ministry, but it is not in a diplomatic and political sense an extension of the Spanish Foreign Ministry. But look, I wouldn't mind if it were. I mean, it's not that long ago that Gibraltar had a Spanish consulate here, which is a representative of the Spanish Foreign Ministry. And we've had individuals in Spain in Gibraltar that we have welcomed and incorporated in our community, who are employed by under diplomatic representatives of the government of Spain. In Gibraltar, people may have recalled me saying this when I was chief minister. In Gibraltar, we mustn't fear what other people regard as normal. You know, the fact that somebody with whom you have a serious political dispute has a diplomatic presence in your country doesn't weaken your position in that dispute. It strengthens your ability to manage the consequences and the problem. So, you know, if anybody thinks that the Instituto Cervantes is bad for Gibraltar because it represents Spanish presence in Gibraltar, it represents Spanish presence in Gibraltar, but not as part of our system of governance, not because they have any right to our system of governance. They are here as a foreign government or as a foreign cultural organization that we have invited into our country, just as the United Kingdom, the British Council is invited into foreign countries, and foreign countries have embassies and consulates in other countries, even when they have sovereignty disputes between them. And nobody believes that means anything adverse in the substance of that. So what I would say to people is, please don't worry. Don't feel that you've got to oppose or be glad the Instituto is present here, or be glad that it is going, because you now have to worry less, because, you know, the enemy is no longer within. The enemy has never been within in any political, diplomatic sense.
Look, let me take this point from the point of view of agreements and agreements having to be kept. The whole edifice of international law and of diplomacy is based on parties being able to rely on agreements reached. There is now such a trail of agreements reached between the United Kingdom and Spain when bilateralism was in vogue, and now after trilateralism, of agreements that Spain has entered into with the United Kingdom and Gibraltar, which she has not kept, that it's actually very difficult to see where we could go next. Political agreements appear to have no value whatsoever to Spanish politicians. Agreements have huge value to British politicians, whether they are UK British politicians or Gibraltar British politicians. When we give our word, when we sign a document, whether it's a political document and not a legally binding treaty, we consider ourselves bound, and we consider that we have to deliver on those agreements. The United Kingdom, despite the austerity which is afflicting it, is continuing to pay the Spanish pensioners under the agreement reached in Cordoba. So we have a completely different attitude to agreements and our obligations under them. Spain has demonstrated, and I'm sorry to have to say Spain, but it is the government of Spain, that depending on the colour of the administration, it can take a different attitude to agreements and simply disregard agreements that had been done before. We were very careful in the GSLP when we were criticising parts of the Cordoba agreements, in particular some aspects of the airport agreement, to say that those bits with which we did not agree, we would wish to renegotiate at the next meeting of the trilateral after the election once we became the government. We did not say that we would abrogate agreements unilaterally and disregard the obligations acquired in international law and in diplomacy under those agreements. That is what Spain has done. Now, the great issue that therefore arises, and this is not just about ad hoc talks, it's even about the return to the trilateral forum. What confidence can the United Kingdom and Gibraltar have as counterparties to Spain in any agreements that we might reach going forward in relation to any matter? How do we know that those agreements are going to survive the administration that is prepared to sit down with us and reach those agreements? That is a seminal issue, because, look, Cordoba was an important step forward. The trilateral was an important step forward because agreements were reached. If we are now told those are just political agreements and they cannot be enforced and they cannot for one moment be relied on, well, that really calls into question what we can even do in the future. Mr. Maragall is responsible for that, and I think generations of Spaniards in future will not forgive him the way that he has acted.
What would you say to somebody in Gibraltar who thinks that Spain is not a country that should be negotiated with?
Well, regrettably, I could say less to put them at their minds at ease than I have been able to about the Instituto Cervantes, because I am very worried about that aspect of the matter. You know, regardless of what you think about the Cordoba agreements were the first batch of agreements to emerge from the trilateral forum structure. And you know, I think they were all good for Gibraltar, but there may be people in Gibraltar who have a different view about that. And so therefore, regardless of what any of your viewers may think about this agreement or that agreement or the other agreement, there is a fundamental issue here. And that is that if Spain feels free to resile from political agreements of the sort that emerged from the Trilateral Forum in Cordoba, every time that there is a change of government in Spain which has a different attitude to the management of relations with Gibraltar, that makes it practically impossible for any future government of Gibraltar to enter into agreements with Spain with any degree of confidence that they will be lasting. And that means that the possibilities for further agreements in the future, for bridge building, for the management through agreements of our disputes with each other, still less for the eventual solution, still less for some eventual theoretical solution to the problem, becomes practically impossible, and the amount of political risk that a government of Gibraltar would need to take in making future agreements is huge, because they will always be exposed to the argument that the agreement won't be honoured by Spain.
Well, I would say that we need to ensure that we have a relationship with our neighbour which is positive and which is designed to deliver mutual benefit. In other words, there is a lot that we can gain from a better relationship with our neighbour, and there's a lot that our neighbour can also gain, ignoring the sovereignty issues where they will never gain anything, but there are other issues where they can benefit and we can benefit: jobs, economic development, etc., etc. So we must try to bring about that dialogue. Now, talking is better than fighting, and just by talking we're establishing a relationship and we're moving forward. There is a challenge now, not just to try and agree on things that we cannot agree on. There is a challenge to try and determine how we can make those agreements something that we can rely on. Or it may be that we reach the conclusion as a community that we want to talk, we want to reach agreements with them on certain things, but we know that Spain, the government of Spain, this is not a comment on the people of Spain or any individuals, Spain as a government cannot be trusted to continue to deliver in the future on agreements in relation to Gibraltar, and therefore we enter into agreements which are light, which don't require much commitment from us, which don't require us to give anything which means meaningful to us, because if we give something which is meaningful, hopefully in return of something which is more meaningful, which is what agreements are usually about, then we can't ensure that what we have believed we've secured is going to be there forever. And therefore, in the same way as the Cordoba agreements were a seminal moment in the history of the relationship between Gibraltar and Spain at a diplomatic level, then the undoing of the Cordoba agreements, which Mr. Margallo has specifically done, the unpicking, I hesitate to say the cherry picking, but the unpicking of every aspect of the Cordoba Accords, as they were formerly called, I think is also a crossing of the Rubicon, but in the wrong direction.
And there is an EU dimension to this too, because the EU have to be very careful when they entertain Spanish, not that they've done so yet, but when they don't reject outright Spanish attempts to push back on, for example, the Cordoba Airport Agreement, because Europe has a big interest in the Gibraltar issue not becoming an obstacle to the fluidity of the conduct of European business. We have resolved lots of European frozen business on the basis of the agreements we were able to do. Passports, ID cards, the rights of children, the Hague Convention on the Rights of Children. Many items of business that were paralyzed throughout Europe because of Spain's attitude towards Gibraltar's inclusion have been resolved because we were able to do agreements that both sides had confidence would be respected. Well, the European Union has got to be careful not to encourage Spain to make agreements impossible to reach with her for Gibraltar because of unreliability, because that condemns Europe and the European Union to an unmanageable raising by Spain of the Gibraltar issue and the paralysis through that of European business. So I think the United Kingdom, the European Union institutions, and indeed other European member states should be saying to Spain, look, you've done agreements, all right, they're not treaties, they are not sort of legally binding agreements, but they are political agreements reached in very difficult political circumstances in relation to a pretty intractable political problem. Honour them, because otherwise it makes the future pretty unmanageable between the three parties.
Just to finish off, can I ask you when you expect to be able to sit down with the Chief Minister?
Well, hopefully during the course of next week. He's been busy. I've also been very busy this week. It isn't a matter that is very urgent at the present moment. So during the course of next week, I expect that we will be able to sit down and that he will be able to brief me on what these new proposals have been from the Spanish government. I don't expect that there'll be any division at all between myself and the Chief Minister in relation to this. I think we've got exactly the same aims in relation to this, and as I say, provided the talks are safe, I think the Gibraltar government ought to attend. My understanding as well is that it's not going to be any talks at ministerial level. It's going to be at a technical level. But of course, even that is important because sometimes there is the propensity to make mistakes at a technical level that perhaps you will not make at ministerial level. So we've got to be on our guard, whether it's at ministerial or whether it is at technical level. Provided that the talks are safe in the sense that I've described, I would be attending if I were Chief Minister.
Well, I'd say this. I think that Mr. Malagallo has now demonstrated that no attitude from Gibraltar, however positive, could have delivered a better relationship with his particular incarnation of the Partido Popular. I do hope that there is an opportunity to have links with the Partido Popular in the future, whether or not they win the election with an absolute majority in Spain, whether they lose the election, whether they form a minority government as a senior or junior partner. The Partido Popular is an important political party in Spain. It is a broad church, and the attitude that Senor Malagallo has displayed is clearly not the attitude of everyone who makes up that party. We saw between 1997 and 2000 that Senor Matute has displayed an attitude very similar to Senor Malagallo's, as rabid on some occasions in relation to Gibraltar, less rabid probably overall than Senor Malagallo has demonstrated his attitude to be. He was followed by Senor Piqué, who was much more urbane, much more sophisticated. Gibraltar was less of an issue. It was possible to see that there might be some interlocution and dialogue there, although of course unfortunately all of that led to the joint sovereignty debacle, which we don't want to go back to. I sincerely hope that we can see a different face to Spain. Senor Malagallo has done huge damage to the relationship with the United Kingdom. The relationship between Spain and the United Kingdom is not as strong as it could be. Philip Hammond says that repeatedly because of the way Spain treats Gibraltar. He has done even bigger damage to the relationship between Gibraltar and Spain at an institutional level. I think he has now demonstrated himself to be so radical and so extreme in relation to this issue that thank goodness even some of those who might have been listening to him or prepared to lend him an ear in Spain 2 years ago, 3 years ago, have now seen just how rabid his attitude is and how undeserving of support it is, and there are therefore voices talking about returning to a better relationship with Gibraltar, to the trilateral, etc. And my abiding view of these years is that Senor Malagallo has not achieved any of what he set out to do. Forget the official attempts that he's made to go back to bilateralism, that he's wanted to try and see if he can advance the Spanish claim. None of that is ever going to happen. He started off on a project that was doomed to failure. It was a sterile attempt to try and move the Gibraltar issue forward in some way. No progress whatsoever. His time at the Spanish Foreign Ministry will be seen, I think, even by him when he goes away and closes his eyes and thinks about his time, as an absolute and abject failure. But the biggest failure, I'm very, very happy to say, is at the human level. he has not been able to break the real human relationships between people on both sides of the frontier. Business continues to flow, and as I sometimes say around the world when I go and explain about these things, people continue to fall in love and make friends across that frontier. He hasn't been able to stop that.
And that's where we leave this week's Viewpoint, which has explored the road from Córdoba to Madrid. We have some great editions lined up for you in March, so make sure you stay tuned every Thursday. Details to follow very soon. Join the conversation online using the GBC Viewpoint hashtag. But for now, that's all from us here at Broadcasting House. Many thanks for watching, and good night.